Hey, good morning, everyone. How's it going? So what do I got now? I've got a 2007 Toyota Camry. It got towed in with a broken axle. Let me show you something. Now, I'm a big proponent of doing maintenance. Now, there's a good axle. Here's a broken axle. That thing must have been making some kind of a racket for a while for it to be that dried up and not have the bearings, the ball bearings anymore. Everything fell apart. My point is, don't ignore noises. Noises indicate there's something going on. There's something not right. Your car didn't come through from the factory with noises in it. This thing had to be making a clattering noise going around turns. Had to. This thing had to have a vibration. So, but anyway, just wanted to show you that. We're going to be putting an axle in this. So I'm going to start by pulling the wheel off. I got an axle on its way. This has a carrier bearing, but I don't know. Now, when I say carrier bearing, I'm talking about this. And I'm pretty confident you have to take this out. It's got a big giant clip here, and it's got this set bolt. This usually holds like a rubber piece of the bushing in there, but usually this axle is one piece all the way to there. Some go into the tranny. Some of them, this piece is separate into this axle stub. So, but I'm going to find out. I'm pretty sure this is one piece on this vehicle. But anyway, so let's start with taking the wheel off. I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to go step by step and show you a few things. Check that out. See that? It's missing a nut. Cool. I got to see if I can find something to replace that with. All right, so let's get going. Let's pull the wheel off. Let's start taking some stuff apart. And also talking about maintenance. See, stuff like this goes down the road and it just irritates me. I mean, look at the wiper blades. How effective is that? Not very effective. And these people drive down the road with you, me, our family, our kids, you know, going down the road. And then people wonder why accidents happen. It drives me nuts. It really does. But anyway, let me keep going, getting the axle done. I'm going to call them and see if they want to do wiper blades. You'd be surprised. People, oh, no, I'm fine. Don't worry about it. Okay, whatever. Let me keep going. And now with the wheel off, you're going to take the axle nut off. Not a big deal. I'm going to use an impact. If you don't have an impact, what you could do is you stick a screwdriver or some kind of a holding tool into the rotor. Then this way, if you're using a breaker bar on the ground, and then if you put it under here, as you rotate it, obviously it's going to rotate the rotor this way as you're trying to break it free. The screwdriver will hit the caliper bridge and stop it. And this way you have something to work against instead of having somebody inside it to hit the brakes. So anyway, if you look inside here, that's part of the cage that holds the bearings in place for the outer outer CV joint, I should say. And you can see it's got fresh brakes in it. See that? So this thing was rattling around for a while. You can actually see the hammer marks on this thing. See that from the bearings just beating themselves to death on this thing. So this thing had to be making an incredible amount of noise for quite a while. So let's keep going. Oh, and the new axle does come as a full shaft, so we're going to take that whole thing apart. So I just impacted the nut off, no big deal. So here the axle shaft moves nice and free. Sometimes these things get seized in there and you got to beat this thing through. If you have access to an air hammer, use one with a pointed tip to drive this through. I've had it to where they won't even break free to go in, and what I've had to do is get a heavy duty puller that'll mount to the studs and then the center go in, and then you wind up having to drive it in to get that thing to release. I've had some give me an absolute dickens of a time. One time I had one that was so seized up I could not break it free no matter what I tried to do. I wound up heating the snot out of this thing and still wouldn't come free. I wound up cutting the axle off at the joint and then taking the whole knuckle off, sticking it in a press and pressing it out. I mean, that was a job and a half, but you know, I got it out. So now with this thing free and this thing loose like that, we're going to put it up in the air. We're going to disconnect the lower ball joint. So now I'm going to pull out the bolts for the ball joint. Like I said, there's supposed to be two nuts. There's obviously one missing and a bolt. You take those out instead of taking a ball joint off here. This is just much easier. Swing the control arm down. Hold on one second. Anyway, swing the control arm down. Then what I'm going to do is push this out to separate the axle from the hub. Now, when you go to push this out, what you want to do is take the wheel over there, cut it all the way to the right. This way the tie rod's sticking out. And once it's sticking out, you'll get more room to pull this whole hub assembly out. I'll show you what I mean. All right, so as you see, I have the wheels cut to the right. So this way, now when I pull down on the ball joint and separate it from the control arm, I have this whole area of articulation where I can pull it out. The axle will stay there, but it'll give me all that extra distance. If you have the wheel straight and now you're trying to cut it to do that, it just makes life a little difficult. So let me see if you can see what I'm doing here. Let me separate this. And you could do this on the ground, but see that? Once I'm pulling it straight, see? Just pulling it straight, it falls out. It makes your life so much easier. Look at that. I mean, just absolutely fell out on its own. And here's that inner piece, as you can see, just broke away from it. So now, one other thing, what we're going to do is, I can ratchet strap this to the back wheel or something, but I always push this thing back in an effort to get it off of there. This way, when I want to get it back, I mean, this way when I drive the axle out, I'm not smacking up against the caliper or anything like that. It just makes your life that much easier. So let me strap that, and then let's go on with trying to get that axle out of the carrier. And as you see, I have this thing tied down to the lift. It's just easier because I'm using a lift. If you don't have a lift, you can go and attach some kind of a tie strap or ratchet strap to like a hole underneath, rear suspension, rear rim, whatever, just to pull it back, because as you see, now I have a straight shot out of the axle itself. So let's move our way over to here. And like I said, I'm going to have to take this retaining clip out here. It's just a squeeze type clip. You got to grab it with a pair of pliers or something. Got to squeeze that, and then I got to take this 14 loose because this is going to grab that bearing. Then we're going to have to drive this out of there. So I don't know how much of this I can actually film while I'm doing it. I'll try, but let's see. All right, so let's see what I can do here. Sorry if the camera's shaking. It's my tripod. So I have it kind of extended so I can get in here. I'll just grab it with a channel lock. There. So now that's released from the carrier piece. Now let me get a 14 and loosen that. It's really not necessary to take it all the way out, but you do want to loosen it up quite a bit, just to make sure it's not jamming up against something. All right, sorry for the delay there. I should have closed the camera, but I mean, you can take it out. You don't have to take it out. So now, with that nice and loose, I'm going to try to strike the axle somehow to drive it out. So let me figure something out there, and then let's see if we can get it out. So I'm going to try a strikeable pry bar that I have. I can't get in there, and hit it with a hammer. And there it moves. Now, one thing I'm going to do too is on this side, where it's coming out of the transmission, I'm going to put a bucket or something on the floor because I might lose tranny fluid. Sometimes you lose a ton of tranny fluid, sometimes you don't lose any tranny fluid. So let me get a bucket ready. And let's see, will this thing just slide out now? Yes, it does. And I'm not losing any tranny fluid at all. It's actually out of the transmission. All right, so now I'm going to slide this whole thing out and then I'll show you something. So here's the new axle up against the old axle. I have to change over this clip. The new axle does not come with the clip. I should be able to just pry this thing over. Sometimes you got to use a pry bar. So this way it'll spread it out to get it over. Can I do it while you're watching? Yeah. And then on this one, as you see, just take it and pop. So now, as I always say, reverse procedure to install. Now that bolt that was snugging this in place, I believe it just has a rubber tip, and all it does is it keeps the outer part of the bearing from spinning in the carrier bracket itself. So you don't have to do anything, you don't have to put anything on it. So basically you just put everything back in place and you're good to go. So let me put this back together, and if I come across anything odd, I'll show you. But that's it. It's basically a reverse procedure to install. So let's get going with that. The axle's in place. I didn't put the clip in yet. Now let me just point something out. Make sure it's seated and catch the clip first before you tighten that up, because if you tighten that up and you're not fully seated, you'll never get the clip in, because this will make sure that you're, all the way down and in place. So now let me get the clip in place, and then I'll tighten that up once the clip is in. As you see, the clip is in place, and it wasn't fully bottomed out. But now the clip is in place. There is a receiver groove that you can just barely see the edge of. I could never get the camera to film that, but there's barely an edge there that you could see. But it wasn't fully seated, so I had to just tap the end in and get it to seat. But let me pull this out so you could see it. And the end is flat, and no, this one doesn't have any rubber on it. I don't know if it's supposed to. Because see, there's that little divot in the center. I just don't recall. But basically, it just, like I said, locks. Oh yeah, no, there isn't. I thought maybe there was the rubber piece inside. I could swear there's supposed to be a rubber piece on there, but I'm not going to be concerned about it. I could feel it just touch the bearing as this thing came down, like the last 16th of a turn. So it's pretty, if you lose that bolt, you got to be real careful of what you're doing. So let me snug that down and let's go back together with everything. And there's another shot of the wheel being pulled out of the way. When you're doing this too, you got to be mindful of your brake lines, your ABS lines, ABS wiring, everything else like that. This thing won't go back any further because it's articulating the sway bar end link a bit. So that's as far as it'll go. So now what I'll do is I'm going to release this strap. Little macabre side note on this strap. I got it from a guy many, many years ago who later went on to go to jail for murder. Anyway, so you release this. And now when this is released, let me get this off of here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get this caught back on there. And then on the other side, I'm going to straighten the wheel out. So this way the axle gets pulled through the center. And you may want to spray some WD on there, or maybe you could put a little bit of grease on there. Just something. You don't have to go nuts. You don't need a ton of it. So just a little WD usually works wonders. So let's get this back together. Now, let's see if I can film this. Me getting this caught. Now once you start getting that in place, it's caught into the splines. And like I said, you cut the wheels back on this side. And a lot of times I'll cut it all the way to the opposite side. Because then this way I can get the axle to push all the way through and catch the threads of the nut. Because if you don't do that, sometimes you can actually pull it apart while you're working on it. So there, I caught the nut. So now I can catch the lower control arm. So let's put this up in the air so I can catch the lower control arm. So now what I'm going to do is, now that the axle's caught, I'm going to cut the wheels straight. Now that the wheels are straight, I can catch the ball joint. Forgive me because I'm trying to work around the camera so you can see what I'm doing. Sometimes it can be a pain. Alright, so now that's caught. Now I can put the nuts on there and put the bolt back in. And what you want to do is you want to make sure you catch the bolt actually first, because I've seen people go and tighten down the nuts and then they try to put this in and you can break the ball joint. So there we go. So now I'm going to catch the nuts. I actually got to find another nut for that. And then we're going to go together. I actually had a factory Camry lower ball joint bolt nut in my stash. I never throw away hardware ever. I wind up with buckets and buckets and buckets full. And I try to separate it. I try to keep, I try to keep it like per car. And sometimes when I can't do that, I try to keep it, like the bolt size and nuts and American metric. I really do. So, but anyway, so now I'm going to torque the nut. I actually already did, but let me show you what I'm doing. So here it is. There's a torque wrench. Set at 219. That's the torque for this nut. That's a lot of torque. And I actually should have a longer torque wrench, but I don't have one here at the moment. But basically I got the rotor stopped, like I said, with the screwdriver. So now, what you do is, there we go, that's torqued. So that's it. Oh, actually no, that's not it. I actually have to stake the nut. Let me show you that. See, that's the reason for that slit in there, because you're supposed to stake the nut to the axle. Let me show you how to do that. I will usually just grab a blunt tip chisel and place it into the groove like that and strike it with a hammer. See if I move back a little bit. Like that. And that's it. See that? And the reason for that is just to help keep it from backing off, like what a cotter pin would do on a regular nut. It's kind of the same thing. Not that I've ever seen one of these things back off when somebody didn't do that. I mean, at 219 foot-pounds, it's quite a bit. But yeah, so let's get the wheel on this and finish this up. All right, so I'm going to take this on a road test. I'm confident everything's fine. But yeah, that's about it. So hopefully you got something out of that video. You know, like I said, maintenance is important. Keep up with stuff on your car. You hear noises, check it out. I mean, it's there for a reason. Turn your radios off. I got people that keep their radios cranked all the time. They don't realize they got wheel bearings falling out of their car. It happens constantly. It's unbelievable. Turn your radios off. At least one day a month, just for a half-hour ride. Don't have a radio on. Anyway, all right, guys. Hopefully you got something out of that video. Now you know how to change an axle if needed. Other cars are very similar that don't have that type of a carrier bearing, but different cars are different, but they're relatively the same. But yeah, okay. If you're getting something out of my videos, hit that like button. If you could, please subscribe. Tell your friends to subscribe too. All right. Have a great day. Keep wrenching.